I cheated on my husband with his cousin during a weekend at the country house. When he found out, he spread the photos and even my own parents rejected me. I was always told that I was privileged to have a husband like Diego, a renowned doctor, 36 years old, sober, elegant, the kind of man that all the neighbors praised and that caused a silent envy among some of my friends. From the outside, our life looked like one of those health insurance commercials. A nice house, a healthy son, trips twice a year. But on the inside, I had already died a long time ago. I became invisible to him. The kind of woman who passes through the room and barely registers her presence. I became an extension of his routine, of his laundry, of his medical agenda. My name is Mariana. I am 33 years old. I am an architect. I have been praised. I have been desired. I have felt like a woman, but within that marriage, I felt more like a housekeeper. I coordinated the tasks, I took care of the bills, I organized everything, but I no longer felt life in me. Diego treated me with politeness, yes, but not with passion. He was like a coworker with whom I shared a bed, and even that happened less and less. He was always tired, he was always on duty, he always had a new conference or someone in a critical situation to save, except me. I did not blame him. I myself came to believe that perhaps that was the destiny of any woman after 30, after a child, after years of marriage. But then I began to pay attention to my own reactions. How long it took me to get ready even without anyone noticing. In the lipsticks I put on before going to a construction site, in perfumes out of habit. All of this hid a desire that I barely admitted to myself. I wanted to attract attention. I wanted to be wanted again. I felt like a shadow of the woman I was. Loneliness in a couple is one of the worst. Because you share the house, but not the soul. I shared the silence with Diego for many months. Our conversations were limited to practical matters. There was no more "and how do you feel?" The affection was bureaucratic and, the worst part, I began to feel ashamed of my own body, as if it had become a disposable item. The frustration, which was supposed to be temporary, became permanent. And when he said, "I am exhausted," I wanted to scream, "Me too." But he did not scream, swallowed once more. It was during this period that Diego decided we should go to the family country house more often. "The calm will do you good, Mariana," he said. He did not know that that isolated house, with its old furniture and its smell of wood, awakened in me another form of prison. It was like being on the perfect stage for a social role that I did not choose. There I was, the wife, the exemplary daughter-in-law, the devoted mother. Never Mariana, never the woman with her own desires, with dreams, with unexpressed desires. And it was on this stage that the first sounds of temptation began to resonate. The first time I noticed Javier's presence was on one of those visits. Diego's cousin, 34 years old, an independent accountant and completely different from him. Javier was the type of man who looked you in the eyes, who asked questions that did not seem mechanical, who smiled in a way that reminded me of things I had already forgotten. And it was then that something in me began to move, something that I no longer knew existed. And perhaps for that very reason, I did not want to ignore it. Javier has always been one of those wild cousins of the family, a little more relaxed, more provocative, maybe even a little cynical. But he never crossed the line until he started to notice me. The first few times I thought it was all in my head, but it became impossible to ignore the prolonged glances during dinners, the comments disguised as compliments, but that carried a second layer. "You were always the prettiest in this family. It is a shame that no one sees you anymore, right?" He said it during lunch, smiling with the naturalness of someone who throws gasoline on dry land. Diego, as always, was too engrossed in his cell phone, answering patients, and did not even notice the interactions between us. And that made everything more dangerous and more exciting. Javier did not need to do much. He just had to be there, sitting nearby, listening to me, looking at me with that interest that no one had shown in me for years. He did not hide it. He praised my hair, my clothes, my architectural projects that his aunt commented on. And when I laughed at one of his comments and he responded with, "That smile of yours should be a crime," my stomach churned. Not for the compliments themselves, but because I liked it. It was after a family lunch that he sent me his first message. A simple photo of the fireplace in the country house with the caption, "I was looking at this light and I thought of you." I opened my cell phone and felt a slight dizziness, as if someone were starting to breathe again after holding their breath for a long time. I could have ignored it, deleted it, pretended I did not see it. But I responded, and that was all he needed. From then on, the conversations began to intensify, exchanging songs, memes, inside jokes. Something that I did not even remember existed in my life, flirting. The craziest thing is that it made me feel light. I found myself smiling alone, reading his messages while Diego talked about exams, shifts, bills. I began to wait for messages like someone waiting for a magical touch in the midst of boredom. Javier said he did not understand how Diego did not look at me, did not kiss me, did not hug me. And I pretended to disagree, but each of his words was like wine entering the bloodstream, sweet, intoxicating, addictive. On one of his later visits to the country house, he purposely left his cell phone on the living room with a photo of me as the wallpaper. Someone saw it, commented quietly, and stopped talking. But he knew what he was doing, and I left. On that visit, Diego got sick after overindulging in wine. He went to bed early. Javier sent me a message from the next room. "If you want to talk, I am awake." And I went, but not that night. In fact, it was that night that everything inside me lit up. I did not do anything, but the fire was lit and I just needed a break. The following weekend was planned, a long vacation. The whole family gathered again at the country house. Diego, excited about the idea of the space out, and Javier already had everything planned. And although he still told me that nothing was going to happen, I already knew that he had crossed an invisible line. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing is not the touch, it is the look that makes you forget that something is wrong. It was during that vacation at the country house that everything fell into place. Even if it was not physical, even if I, at that moment, still deceived myself by saying it was just words. The messages between Javier and me had already changed in tone. Now it was not just about the weather, the songs, or the inside jokes. He began to send me compliments about my body, about how he imagined me in certain clothes or, rather, without them. I should have blocked him. I should have, but the truth is that I read everything. I reread it and kept it like someone who collects secrets to use on empty days. The first night of vacation, during dinner, we were all on the balcony. I got up to get a glass of wine and he offered to accompany me. Alone in the kitchen, he got too close. The smell of his cologne, the warmth of his body so close to mine. I tried to hide it, I grabbed the bottle, but when we turned around, we collided. Our hands touched. A second, a shiver, and neither of us moved away immediately. It was just a touch, but for me, it was like the beginning of the end. My heart was beating like a drum, and I knew he felt the same. That same night, I went to the living room to get the charger. The lights were low, everyone had already gone upstairs. When I turned around, he was there, leaning against the door. He said something like, "I was looking for you," and I just smiled. He came closer, took my chin with his fingers, and kissed me. A calm, paused, almost respectful kiss. But it was in that kiss that my whole body trembled. I felt my legs go weak and I pulled away, saying, "This is wrong." He simply replied, "It is wrong for you to live unhappy and pretend that everything is fine." I went back to the room and cried. It is not out of regret yet, no, but because I knew there was no going back. Even if the kiss was not repeated, and I already knew it would be repeated, even if no one found out, the simple fact that I enjoyed that kiss more than any other I had received in recent years said it all. I had crossed the line, and now all that was left was the game of self-deception. It was no big deal, it was just an impulse. Maybe he does not even take it seriously. But I knew that everything in me wanted more. The following days were a delicious torture. Javier sent me even more daring messages, saying that he could not stop thinking about the kiss, that he dreamed of me. I responded, trying to maintain some dignity, but everything in me was screaming for more. The adrenaline, the guilt, the excitement. Returning home with Diego was like getting off a plane straight into a dark basement. I started making excuses to go out alone, to go downtown, to visit a university friend, all so I could talk to Javier in peace, away from people, away from my own shame. Shortly after, he invited me for a coffee. He said he wanted to talk without pressure. We made an appointment at a mall on the other side of the city. When I saw him, waiting, sitting, smiling, I felt something in my chest that I had not felt in years. I stood there, watching, and thought, what am I doing? But the answer came in the blink of an eye, what I never did for myself. When I sat down at the table, he took my hand without hesitation. He said he wanted my help with an architectural project for his new office, an excuse as flimsy as it was brazen. And it was then that we agreed on the next weekend. We would find a way to see each other alone, without beating around the bush, without guilt, just the two of us. It was a sultry Saturday night. The whole family had gathered again at the country house for another of those weekends that seemed like a repetition of the previous one. Barbecue, forced laughter, children running around, and Diego again exhausted after a week of shifts, sleeping before 10 at night with his cell phone still vibrating on the bedside table. I also went to the room. I changed, but I walked around the house in silence, and then I received the message, I am in the back room, just come and talk. And I went, of course I went. The room where Javier was old, with a wooden bed that creaked at every step. When I entered, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, with his shirt half open and the dim light on. He simply said, close the door. I closed it and there, without another word, he got up, walked towards me, and kissed me with a hunger that seemed to have been repressed for years. There was no hesitation, no time to think. It was as if my body had decided for me. His hands roamed my back, my hips, my thighs, and I let him. I let everything happen as if it were inevitable. We had sex right there, on the bed that Diego used to use when he was a child, the same bed that his grandmother insisted on keeping, with the old flowered sheets, like a reliquary of family tradition. The smell of wood mixed with Javier's strong perfume, the creaking of the mattress with every movement, and the adrenaline pounding like a thunder inside me. I no longer knew who I was at that moment. I only knew that I was alive and that, as bad as it was, I had not felt something like that for a long time. It was not just physical, it was not fast. Javier seemed to know exactly how to touch me, where to squeeze me, where to bite me, where to stop. He said things in my ear that left me breathless. He called me beautiful, brave, a woman. Words that had become fiction in my routine. And there, at the climax of the act, I cried. But he thought it was emotion. Maybe it was all together, guilt, anger, desire, fear. I surrendered like someone falling into a bottomless pit, and a part of me, deep down, knew that it would not be the last time. When it was over, we were silent. He stroked my hair while I stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what had just happened. I said, I have to go, but I did not move for minutes. When I finally got up, I looked at him and said, this cannot happen again. And he just smiled, like someone who already knew I was lying. I went back to the room in silence. I lay down next to Diego, who did not even move, and cried again, this time in silence, with my head buried in the pillow, trying to make my body forget what my heart had just recorded. The next morning, I made coffee as usual, with a smile on my face as if nothing had happened, but my fingers trembled when I picked up the cups. Javier passed behind me in the kitchen and ran his hand down my waist, quickly and imperceptibly to the eyes of others. I froze. My whole body was still reacting to his presence, and then I understood. It would not be just once, because what we started on that bed was not just an act, it was an opening, a door. And from that day on, I knew I would cross it again. And again. After that night at the cabin, the line between what was real and what was a lie dissolved. I went home with Diego, had lunch with my mother-in-law, took our son to school, paid the bills, everything as usual. But now there was an invisible layer over my routine, the almost animal need to see Javier again. And when I say need, I am not exaggerating. Just thinking about him made my legs feel restless, my hands sweat, and sometimes my panties wet. Yes, that was it. An addiction, a lack of control. I started making more and more elaborate excuses. He said he had a last-minute meeting with an undecided client, that he needed to visit a construction site on the other side of the city, that a well-known architect was calling me to collaborate on a conceptual project. Diego never questioned. In fact, he even seemed relieved that I was more active and more enthusiastic about work. He did not know that I was getting naked in an Airbnb and in Javier's office, throwing my marriage in the trash for a few minutes of skin and sweat. The meetings were as intense as they were clandestine. With each new escape, we became bolder. We had sex in his car, parked in a dark parking lot. We had sex standing up, leaning against the studio wall while it was pouring rain outside. I even left a real meeting and ran to meet him, with my panties already wet from just reading a message on my cell phone, "I need you now." And I would go running, as if it were a matter of survival. And deep down, I believed it was. But the more I delved into it, the more Javier began to show another side. He began to send me messages demanding quick answers. If I was late in replying, he would send an audio asking if Diego was home, if I still wanted that. He began to say that he wanted exclusivity, that he could not bear to imagine me going back to bed with my husband. And I, at first, said that I needed to understand my side, but deep down, more and more, I also wanted to get lost there. But something inside me began to suspect that Javier was not just an escape, he was also a bottomless pit. Meanwhile, Diego began to notice the distance. He would comment on things like, "Are you more distant?" or "I think we need to talk more." No, I smiled, I changed the subject, I pretended to be tired, but it was visible. Even my son asked me why I had been so quiet the last few days. The weight of the lie was already beginning to scratch my skin. But the desire drowned out the guilt. I told myself that I was going to stop, that meeting would be the last, but he already knew I was lying. And Javier knew it too. The last time we saw each other, at that moment, he told me that he wanted to run away with me. "We can rent a place of our own. You deserve more, Mariana. You deserve to be truly loved." And for a second, I believed him. I really believed him. But when I left his apartment and got into the car, I saw a picture of my son on the dashboard. That made me step back like a slap, and I thought, how long can I keep this all up before it all falls apart? The answer would come very soon, and not in the way I expected. The fall began on a hot Sunday afternoon. It was one of those family barbecues that I could not stand anymore, but I pretended to love. There was Javier, of course, more relaxed than ever, talking to his uncles, playing with the children, pretending he was just another guest. I tried to keep my distance, but our gazes met like two accomplices to a crime about to be discovered. And maybe it was. He left his cell phone on the porch table unlocked. On purpose or not, I still do not know. Diego, who was looking for his uncle's doctor's number, took the device thinking it was his. The silence was instantaneous. The kind of silence you feel before a disaster, as if the world were holding its breath. Diego stood still, staring at the screen, pale, and then looked at me. But not angry, disgusted. A look I will never forget. Then he pointed his cell phone at the table. There were the photos. Me naked, lying on the bed in the country house. Me on my knees, smiling at Javier as he held me by the hips. A sequence of images that I did not even remember existed. And 3 more videos of me using my mouth to satisfy Javier while he moaned, saying that my mouth was the hottest in the world. And they were there, like gunshots. Cruel, irrefutable. Diego got up without a word, went into the house, took out his cell phone, and a few seconds later, all the family members were looking at the screen. Uncles, aunts, cousins, my mother-in-law, my mother. The reaction was a mixture of horror, shock, judgment. No one asked anything, no one gave me a voice. The family group exploded. My sisters called me crying. My parents sent me messages saying they no longer knew who I was. My son was hastily removed from the room without understanding anything. I was left there alone with my raw soul. That night I was kicked out of the country house. Yes, kicked out. Diego put my things in a bag and told me, "I do not want to look at your face. Get out of here." My mother, who was staying in a room next door, simply said, "You destroyed everything." I went back home from the city alone, driving with trembling hands. Every notification that came to my cell phone was a new scam, impressions of photographs circulating in groups that were not even family. The people in the neighborhood, friends from college, even from my son's school, began to whisper. I was blocked by people I had no idea existed. The mutual friends disappeared. The coworkers began to act differently, even without saying anything directly. The feeling was of being contaminated, as if my skin had become a walking stain of scandal. The shame was so great that I did not leave the house for 3 days, just lying down, crying, without eating. I wanted to run away, disappear, die. But I knew the worst was yet to come. Diego was not one to swallow humiliation in silence, and, in fact, he did not swallow it. On Monday morning, what I call polite revenge began. He began to move the pieces like a surgeon, precise, calm, without haste. But this chapter deserves to be told in full detail, because if you think I have been destroyed so far, you have not seen anything yet. The day after the discovery, I learned that Diego had printed the photos to continue his revenge. All on high-quality photo paper. He put it in envelopes and sent it to my friends, coworkers, and even neighbors, people who had no idea what was happening. No one could pretend they did not know anymore. And he pointed out that the act had taken place on his grandmother's bed, in the family's country house. The detail of the place was repeated like a knife twisting in everyone's chest. And as if that were not enough, the rumors began to circulate in the condominium. Loose phrases like, "Did you see who passed by with that man?" or "She destroyed the marriage." Poor girl. My life became a dirty soap opera. And at work, hell broke loose with the looks. The men who before barely noticed me now looked at me as if they knew everything. Someone passed me in the hallway and said, "Good morning, Mariana. You have been smiling more lately, haven't you?" with that disgusting tone of someone who thinks they know too much. Others began to make up excuses to call me to their office. It was as if I had become a fetish. I went after the only person who still treated me with respect, Paula, a senior colleague in the sector, influential in the company, who called me to talk and said, "You have to get out of here. He will destroy you." I asked for a transfer and she did everything quickly. I will never forget the way she looked at me, without judging me, just seeing the broken woman I had become. It was thanks to her that I was able to change areas, but the damage was already done. Those days were like a loop of shame, anxiety, and anger at myself. And it was at that moment of total fragility that Javier reappeared. He sent me a message saying he wanted to see me, that he felt guilty, that he was also suffering, that he wanted to talk in person. I was reluctant, but I accepted. Maybe hoping for support, maybe wanting to escape, maybe still deceiving myself with the idea that he could fix something. We booked an apartment that, he said, he used as a temporary studio. I arrived emotionally shattered and he received me as if nothing had happened. He kissed me, praised me, said he missed me, and took me to bed. We had sex. And for a moment, I thought it was a kind of reunion, a reconciliation of wounded souls. But when it was all over, he got dressed too quickly. "You said you needed to leave." He left me there alone, without even looking back. When I sent a message hours later, I was already blocked on everything: Instagram, WhatsApp, even email. It was then that I understood. He just wanted one more night. Maybe as revenge for not choosing him, maybe simply out of ego, maybe because deep down, he never wanted me. I was just a game. I went back home, trembling, feeling like human garbage. There was no longer a place where I could hide from myself. Diego hated me. My family cut me off. Javier used me, and, at work, everyone saw me as the woman in the photos. Nothing defined me anymore, nothing but betrayal of the flesh of the fall. And it was there that the real punishment began, not the one that others imposed, but the one that I began to carry within myself every day. From there, what came was the collapse. The following weeks were a blur of shame, insomnia, and isolation. I avoided leaving the house, I avoided mirrors, I even avoided the sounds of my own cell phone. I started having panic attacks in the middle of the night, waking up gasping, thinking that invisible eyes were watching me, judging me, and condemning me. My head relived every detail of the betrayal, the discovery, the photos. I thought of my mother's words, "You destroyed everything," and I felt as if it had been stamped on my forehead. Sometimes I would look in the mirror and barely recognize who I had become. I tried to keep working, keeping my head down, doing the bare minimum. Paula, the colleague who helped me with the transfer, remained my only support network, but not even she seemed to know what else to say. "You have to move on, Mariana." But how? How do you move on when you have become your own ruin? Still, I tried. I downloaded a dating app. I started talking to a guy named Tiago, divorced, father of a girl. He seemed nice. We scheduled a dinner, it was nice. I felt like a woman again, but it was enough for him to notice my emotional instability to disappear with the classic excuse, "You have a lot of unresolved issues." Then came Raphael, polite, kind, attentive. We saw each other a couple of times, we slept together, and, for a few nights, I thought they really liked me. But one day, without warning, he stopped responding. Total disappearance. I thought it was strange. I searched online and there it was, a profile with a wife, 2 children, a perfect life. I was the other woman again, without knowing it, but that is how it was. I felt even dirtier, even more disposable. Another mistake on the list, once again used as a body and thrown away like trash. I got home and cried in the bathroom for hours. It was after that I decided to stop. I stopped looking for love, pleasure, distraction, anything. I understood that my state was deeper than lack. I was shattered, and no one fixes something like that from the outside in. I began to reject invitations, avoiding even the simplest conversations. I just wanted to shrink and disappear from the world. I slept badly, with recurring nightmares, sometimes with Diego looking at me in silence, sometimes with Javier laughing in my face. Even my son, still not understanding what happened, began to treat me with a coldness that cut like a knife. The worst was going out on the street and feeling that everyone knew, that everyone recognized me, that everyone had seen those photos or knew the story that someone had told by heart. That feeling of being a cursed character in a fifth-rate soap opera. I carried the guilt, but also the public shame. And when I tried to explain this to my sister, she simply replied, "You reap what you sow," and maybe she was right, but hearing this from someone I loved broke me forever. The truth is that I had no one else. And the cruelest of all is that even after everything, even destroyed, a part of me still missed him. From Javier? No, not even Diego? But the woman I was before, I got lost in all of them. A version of me that still dreamed, that still believed, that still wanted to be loved. That version died, and now, all that was left was to cry for myself and the certainty that from then on, nothing would ever be light again, nothing would ever be simple.